out there, everyone. Here we are again. Switch for Good podcast, right? Is that where we are, Alexandra?
This is where we are for the next hour.
These days, I feel like I have to check. Where am I? What's happening?
What day is
What's
it?
going on? Well, welcome. So you sent me an email, maybe about 5 days ago, and it was written by Animal Wellness Action and the Center for Responsible Science together. And the title is Sharks, Monkeys, and Horseshoe Crabs Are Casualties of COVID Vaccine Chase. And before I dove into this, I thought, oh boy, I knew they were doing sick and twisted things to animals for this race because there's such a massive dump of billions of dollars from our government to find the vaccine. And my head just I thought I can only imagine. But I'll admittedly say that I didn't go down that rabbit hole, because there's all the rabbit holes are kind of harrowing once you go down them with the things that human beings do to animals that are oftentimes unnecessary, unneeded, and don't even fix the problem. So I want to present here a little bit of what this article dives into, as people can certainly then go find it online and read the entire article. But I want to talk a little bit about what do we do? What is the alternative? So the race to develop the COVID-19 vaccine, with the runners sent down the wrong path by the Food and Drug Administration's, FDA, archaic animal testing regulatory requirements is putting wild animals through all sorts of meat grinders in our laboratories, specifically, as I mentioned, sharks, monkeys, and horseshoe crabs. Researchers may kill upwards of 500,000 sharks for a single moonshot vaccine, while hundreds of other laboratories are injecting and sickening troops of monkeys for their own experimental vaccines. And the vaccine quest, which every sane person agrees is critical for the public and economic health, is even contributing more adverse effects in our marine ecosystems because of stepped up collecting of horseshoe crabs for their distinctive blood type. So that's what's happening. But go to Animal Wellness Action or Center for Responsible Science, because you will get to read the whole article and understand what's happening to the monkeys, what's happening to the sharks, what's happening to the horseshoe crabs. And it's a solid argument with history, which I want you to talk about in regards to HIV and monkeys, that many of these are not going to even work on human beings once they find whatever they're.
So with monkeys, there's a monkey shortage. And when they say monkey shortage, they mean a shortage in laboratories to test on, which is so awful. But what the unfortunate truth is that the FDA here in the United States mandates that all new drugs be tested on 2 species, and rodent and non-rodent. And usually the non-rodent is monkeys or dogs. Mm-hmm. Specifically, 96% of the dogs would be beagles because they're docile and they're not too large. And so the terrible thing about it is that no matter what kind of reaction the dogs or the monkeys have to a certain vaccine, we do not know how it's going to react in humans because they are not human relevant. They are dogs and they are monkeys, beautiful in themselves, but very different from humans and how humans react. So what happens is that the drugs then, having only been tested on animals, go into human trials. I don't know if the human volunteers really understand this, but 95% of drugs that work in animals that make it to human trials do not make it past human trials because they don't work in humans. 95%. It's stunning. It's a stunning statistic. And it's all because of this. Really, it is because stems from the fact that the FDA in the 30s mandated that in an effort to help humans, misguided, but in an effort to help humans, mandates the fact that you have to test on animals. Now, in terms of the scientific validity, let's not even talk about the ethics, but with monkeys, the HIV vaccine was they tried to make one for years, and it worked in monkeys, but it never worked in humans. And even though monkeys share a lot of our DNA, most of our DNA, there's that, just like you and I, everyone reacts differently. Now, you take another species, it's just bad science. And the problem with this science is that it's stopping alternatives from being developed,
Right.
because the money's not going there, because the FDA mandates the animals. So why would you put it into anything else? Because the FDA needs you to test on animals. You talked about sharks. So the vaccines are 3 million sharks are killed each year for their squalene, which is this sort of oily substance that they
Right.
may have in their livers. And it's used in cosmetics and in current vaccines. But of course, with the COVID vaccine, since every person on the planet is going to want to be almost injected maybe twice, maybe
Right.
more, they think that 500,000 sharks will be killed for their squalene to be used in the vaccine. It's something to do with, it's called an adjuvant, and I don't know exactly what that means, but there's an alternative, and it's plant-based. And so we don't have to kill sharks. It's a little harder to get that alternative out of them rather than the livers, interestingly enough. But killing so many sharks is going to damage the ocean incredibly. We need to be using this sustainable sugarcane-derived alternative that's already in use instead of squalene from sharks, hammerheads, great whites, whale sharks. They'll all be devastated.
So are any labs using this sugarcane alternative?
I do not know.
Okay.
But I know
We're gonna find
that a
out.
lot of them, since this is a worldwide effort for this COVID-19 vaccine,
Right.
a lot of them, they're using the sharks because it's easier. It's already been being used in a lot of vaccines. This alternative has been proven. So it's crazy that it's not being used. Now, in terms of the horseshoe crabs, it's interesting. Horseshoe crabs, when I first heard this, I thought, oh, this is so interesting. They use the blood of horseshoe crabs to test endotoxins on the blood because it's very sensitive to endotoxins, which are toxins inside bacteria. They used to use rabbits and hundreds of thousands of rabbits but then they moved to horseshoe crabs, and they bleed the horseshoe crab of a certain percentage of their blood and then throw them back into the ocean. So it seems sustainable, but half the horseshoe crabs actually die, and so many bird populations are now on the endangered species list because they can no longer feed on horseshoe crab eggs, because the population has been so decimated by this practice of bleeding out the horseshoe crabs. Not to mention the fact that, people like you and I just don't agree with that in the first place, when there is a non-animal alternative that's used in Europe called Recombinant Factor C. And the FDA has actually okayed it. They've issued a guidance for it, but there's another part of the government bureaucracy that makes it really hard for people. They have to jump through extra hoops to use this RCF, and so they'll tend to just go back to what's easier and what's been done for years and years.
Okay.
So folks, you need to write to your representatives and tell them that you want a vaccine, but you do not want it from squalene from sharks, or it shouldn't have been tested on horseshoe crabs, and no monkeys too. Jesus, folks. I mean, there are alternatives to animals that we have that we can use. We just need to be using them, and we need to change some of these rules, which is what Center for Responsible Science and Animal Wellness Act are working on, is trying to change the rules that mandate animal testing.
Okay. So can we make sure then in the show notes for this episode that we can be specific about if you're hip to write to your representative some of the specifics of what you just said?
Yeah.
Because that's important.
Will do.
Is there any possibility of a bill being introduced?
Well, we are actually, yes, we're trying to get a bill introduced to, it's not specific to this, but to change the statute that mandates that animals be used to test drugs before they go to market. Yeah. That rule is holding back good science.
Good science, yeah. Okay, well, that's heavy.
Let's go to a lighter note, like
Little bit lighter, but
where
I
I
was
was sunshine. He is
sunshine person. But you know what? We're gonna make him. I'm gonna make him go deep too. So we may get a little
Of
heavy
course
in this.
you-
Of course I am.
of course
Right?
you
Was
are. Yay!
Oh gosh. So this guest I've been very excited about for a long time, and yeah, it's been a long time coming too because we had to change some things around. But he is well, let's just say he's a OG in the athlete and in the athlete sphere, the plant-based athlete sphere. We had Brendan Brazier on a while ago, and Brendan Brazier and our guest today, Robert Cheeke, are the OGs in my opinion for the athlete space in terms of leaning into eating plants and leaning out of eating animal foods. I look up to you, Robert, and revere everything that you've done, and I'm just so grateful for your trailblazing ways, because it's certainly paved the path for all of us, and including me. When I saw you in one of your books for the first time, I was like, okay, I can do this too. I feel like I can do this. You gave us all a lot of hope. And so you're known as one of the most influential vegan athletes of this time, of your time, of our time. And you've been flexing your entirely plant-based muscles, right? Built on plants, right? Very specific. You didn't build your muscles on animal foods and then keep them big on plants. Alexandra was talking about that before we came into this episode, and it's like, yes, that's a really important point. And you've been doing this for the past 25 years. I should mention, too, that you are a 2-time natural bodybuilding champion and also a best-selling author, which was a goal of yours since you were 8, I believe. And your 2 books right now are called Vegan Bodybuilding and Fitness and Shred It. And you have a new book coming out, which I know a little bit about, and we're definitely going to dive into that because that's going to be exciting. Also, you're the founder of the multi-platform vegan bodybuilding and fitness brand. But Alexandra and I know, and so many of us know you for your consistent smile, your kind personality, and you just radiate joy. And I love every time I get to spend even a moment with you. So we're going to get to spend an hour. Thanks for coming on the Switch for Good podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Dotsie, for those kind words, and Alexandra for having me on the show. And
awesome. I love your story, and I mean, I really, really love your story. It's so empowering. You grew up on a farm in Oregon, and you were a runner, and you were like a lot of runners. You were skinny. You were a skinny and endurance runner. And you became vegan at age 15. And I want you to share some of your sister's influence in terms of becoming vegan. But what was that like? And when you started to transform from this skinny runner, vegan farm kid to this champion bodybuilder, take us on that ride.
Yeah, well, Dotsie, I wasn't just a, kind of skinny kid. I was a small kid. I mean, I still have my health papers from 8th grade. So I'm 14 years old in 8th grade, and I weighed 89.25 pounds. And
a quarter,
so,
get the quarter in.
Yeah, hadn't quite cracked 90 pounds yet, just about to go into high school. So pretty thrilled about that. And, I played a lot of sports. I was a 5-sport athlete. I got into high school and I was just barely over 100 pounds and playing on the basketball team. And I still have those photos. I post them online every now and then. And when I became vegan, the next year as a sophomore in high school, from my sister's influence, as you mentioned, I weighed 120 pounds. And as I'm talking to you right now, I weigh about 215 pounds. And I've peaked at 219, so 99-pound gain, which I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think it's important, not just for me, and it's not just cool for me to say, but I think it's important that I did build everything on a plant-based diet. I wasn't champion anything, although I was a pretty good runner. So my sister, who was already vegan, organized this Animal Rights Week at our high school, where she had speakers come in and give presentations. Mind you, this is the mid-'90s in an agriculture community of Corvallis, Oregon, a farming community and agriculture college. town, and speakers came in, and I decided, out of respect for my sister, that I'll go check it out. I had no intentions of being vegan. I would literally go to a sandwich shop or a fast food restaurant every single day for lunch with two of my good friends, who I'm actually still very good friends with today. They're some of my best friends. In fact, I'm going to see one of them later today. And I talked to the other one yesterday. And I've known them since I was, well, one since preschool and one since middle school. And the three of us would go out to lunch every day. And I said, guys, not this week. December 8th, 1995 was the first day. Animal Rights Week at Corvallis High School. I'm going to go check it out. And it's interesting how you started this show, because it was actually videos of factory farming and animal testing, specifically animal testing, that didn't sit well with me, and that inspired me to want to live a cruelty-free lifestyle immediately as a teenager. It was watching rabbits have all their arms and legs tied back and things put in their eyes and poked and stabbed and treated so poorly. And then I realized that even though we took good care of the animals on our family farm, I would raise an animal or two every year in 4-H program, a dairy calf, rabbits, chickens, and then I would sell them at the auction, which they would be turned into food. So here I was with friends, animal friends that had first names that were no different than a dog or a cat. And you may not know that unless you've lived on a farm. You just don't know unless you've spent not just visiting an animal sanctuary for a day, but like you live there with them. You may not realize the companionship that you can develop with a farm animal. And so that made me really question my own morals and ethics. And I decided that day that even if I will never be a big, strong athlete that I want to be and I've always dreamed of, I'm at least going to be a compassionate one. So that's how I got started. And, to this day, my sister is still vegan. She has a vegan partner and vegan daughter. And my younger brother did everything that I did. I was 15. He was only 11. And so he became vegetarian, not even knowing why. He just did everything that I did.
Right.
And he's still vegetarian, actually mostly vegan today, 25 years later. And he lives about an hour from me. And so I just saw him recently. And, that's how it started. And I eventually, as the story goes, I eventually started pursuing other sports. I was a 5-sport athlete, and now getting into track and field and wrestling and soccer and basketball. And then I one day discovered weightlifting from the friend who I'm going to see later today, my childhood friend I used to go to lunch with every day and have burgers and sandwiches. And he, my friend Jordan Baskerville, introduced me to the sport of bodybuilding, something that I was super turned off by. Mm-hmm. I would as a kid, I would see the magazines in the grocery store with all the veins and muscles, and I was just like, didn't even want to look at it. But then later, that's what I wanted to aspire to be. And so I would continue on that journey and eventually put on about 100 pounds and become a champion bodybuilder. And I've actually written a few more books, Dotsie. This is actually my 5th one coming out. So I wrote Plant-Based Muscle along the way with Shred It and Vegan Bodybuilding. And then I wrote an ebook called How to Build a Successful Vegan Brand, which is just an ebook, but it was so fun to write. And it's 232 pages, so it's still substantial. And then, of course, the Plant-Based Athlete, which you, Dotsie, are featured in, and you contributed so much to, is coming out next year.
Well, we'll definitely talk about that. I want to go back. Did you not think you could probably make all the gains? Because you mentioned, well, I don't know if this diet, I don't know like how I'll feel on it or how I'll do, but I know I'll be compassionate. So then when you were introduced to bodybuilding, were you thinking, oh wow, this is going to be challenging on a plant-based diet?
Well, yes and no. At first, I wasn't sure I could do anything athletically on a plant-based diet. This was so new to me. This is 1990s, no internet. The internet kind of came out kind of the next year, or within 6 or 12 months later, at least, public internet for people, regular civilians. And so I wasn't sure at first. So I asked my sister, can I still get adequate calories and protein? I don't know what words I used back then, but she said, Robert, listen, at the end of the day, it's not that you need meat for protein or milk for calcium or, eggs for whatever. Whatever
they provide.
But you need those sources of nutrition. And it's So you need to get protein, carbohydrates, fats, vitamins, minerals, amino acids, all of those things. But she also said something that was really important. She said, not only do you not need animals to get those, animals are not even often the best sources of those. And so I had to learn that later on. And I did. I mean, I performed well all those years in high school, my sophomore, junior, senior year. I was on the #1 ranked soccer team in the state of Oregon. A number of my teammates went on to go play professional soccer around the world. I was on the #2 ranked cross country team in the state. Those runners went on to do great things athletically in their lives. And I made those teams. I worked hard. I was involved in a lot of other sports recreationally, but I was pretty good at like tennis and track and field, where I did every single event except for 4, I think. I mean, I was throwing javelin, shot put, discus. I was doing the hurdles, the 3,000 meters, the 1,500 meters, long jump, triple jump. I did everything and won the Dan O'Brien Award for my school for being a multi-event athlete. And that was all fueled by plants. And then I went on to run cross country in college at Oregon State University in my hometown for a year. And so I knew that I could perform. So when it came to bodybuilding, I knew I could do it too. I just had to figure out how. And I struggled at first, I'll be honest, because I was always an endurance athlete. I was used to burning calories like crazy and not consuming them in a way to build mass. I was deliberately staying pretty light. Even at age 20, I was only up to 150 pounds because I was a runner and I wanted to be light to perform and run fast. But once I started lifting weights, at first I did struggle and had to figure that out, which I've written about in a lot of my books, where I trained for a year with enthusiasm and just all the momentum and energy and enthusiasm that I could muster, and I gained 1 pound. I mean, it was pretty much an epic failure. And then I just tried a different approach. Literally the next week, stumbled upon a book, the Body for Life program, and the next thing I knew, I put on 19 pounds in 12 weeks during that 12-week program, 28 pounds over a 10-month period, and another 10 pounds, and there I was as a 185-pound bodybuilder by age 21, 22, and started competing the very next year and won my first competition 2 years later.
And now you've been a 2-time natural bodybuilding champion, and that is competing against folks who were eating meat also?
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing that's different is that natural bodybuilding is not, natural bodybuilding is drug tested. So no steroids, no anabolic drugs. I've certainly competed in the non-drug tested events, and I've done okay. I finished as high as 3rd place, but I don't do as well because drugs are allowed. Not that they're allowed, they're just not tested for. Of course, they're still illegal, but the sport wouldn't exist without steroids and anabolic drugs and growth hormone, and that's just like a thing that's not talked about. I think very much like in cycling, until the whole Lance Armstrong thing came out many years ago, it was something people in the industry knew about, the blood doping or the drugs or steroids or injections or whatever, but it wasn't talked about. Just like in the NFL, it's getting talked about more now, where there's all the pain injections where you can't even move your arms or legs, but you get needles in you so you can play on Sunday because you're worth millions of dollars to your city and to your franchise. Bodybuilding is more rampant than all of those sports with drugs. That's how it exists. And so in natural bodybuilding, it's just you take a polygraph test, a urine test, and if you win like a major title, like a world championship, they do a blood test as well to make sure you're natural. But yeah, Alexandra, I would compete with people who literally ate 6 chickens a day, like literally 6 chicken breasts a day, maybe 24 egg whites. So
okay, breasts, not the whole chicken, because I was thinking they would eat the 6 chickens, like you pick them up at Boston, whatever that place is.
Yeah. So yeah, chicken breasts, but still, it's still 6 different lives though, right?
Yeah.
It's still
no doubt. I like
6 different individuals, plus all those dozens of eggs, plus whey protein drinks, contributing to negatively to the dairy industry, and we know how awful that is. And so that's the world that I was in. And so one of the fun things was that when you get a chance, at least in the federations that I competed in, and I competed in, I think, 4 different ones, when you won, you got a chance to talk on the microphone. So I could talk about being vegan, on stage. And sometimes I would have that in my music as well. You have this posing routine. You put on posing trunks and you do all this flexing and choreograph routine to music for like 60 seconds. And I would sometimes have, vegan messages in the lyrics and that kind of thing. And so that's what I did for 10 years. And then I retired at a pretty young age 29 or 30, because I wanted to write books, Dotsie, like you said, since age 8, which, by the way, I have to say, one of the most exciting things I've been doing recently. I hope you get a kick out of this. This is so fun for me. I was inspired to be a writer in 3rd grade. My teacher, Carol Young, Mrs. Young, and I have reconnected with her. I just got an email from her 2 days ago, and I've reconnected with my favorite teacher of all time, which is my 4th and 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Smith. She's 91 now.
Wow.
And Lillian Smith is the one that put me in touch with Carol Young. They were both teachers from 3rd to 4th and 5th grade, that time in my life, 8 to 10 years old, when I decided what I really wanted to do with my life. And I've been able to be in touch with both of them recently and sign some books for them and thank them for the role they played in helping me get to this point. And so that's just been the most exciting, fulfilling, and rewarding thing for me personally in a while, and it dates back to, as far as I can remember.
You know how people talk about Robert being so nice? Well, we've been talking for 10 minutes now, and he has just exemplified. He went to something his sister organized as a teenager because he wanted to respect his sister. I mean, how many boys do that, right? Then he was moved and became vegan. And now he's like corresponding with his teachers from 3rd grade. It's Robert, you're a special, beautiful
entire
person.
Light of their life right now.
Yeah. So what was it like being a vegan bodybuilder in the 90s? Was this this is the 2000s, right? The early 2000s when you were competing?
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the 90s for a second, because that was an interesting time. I'll tell you, it was, even though I was in an agriculture town, it was still a bit of a progressive town, big on recycling and this kind of thing back then. And so it was met with different reactions because I became vegan overnight as a high school athlete, and I was already on all these sports teams. So I immediately changed shoes, non-leather shoes, and I didn't have like the cool brand soccer shoes that everyone had. And I worked with the physical education teacher who was also the head football coach at our high school, Gary Beck, and got them to discontinue ordering leather equipment, basketballs, footballs, whatever, for physical education for our high school, to get them to order, rubber basketballs and synthetically made materials, because I was very passionate about the lifestyle, as I still am, but as we often are in those early stages. So I was able to give presentations in high school. I even got kicked out of class for getting a little bit too passionate about animal rights in a discussion. So I want to mention that because, I was a little bit of an outcast, as far as I wasn't using the same equipment. I wasn't eating the same foods, using the same beverages. I was a little bit different, but these were already my friends I'd established for years and grew up with. And so I was also embraced at the same time. In fact, a few other high school teammates adopted a plant-based lifestyle too. And so that was really nice to have other cross-country team members or soccer team members doing the same thing. But when it came to bodybuilding, that was a bit more foreign. That was early 2000s, 2001, 2003, 2005, those days. And it wasn't, not only was it not common, it wasn't really heard of. As Dotsie said, in those days, there were only about 3 or 4 vegan bodybuilders that I knew of, and my website was up and running by then. Veganbodybuilding.com debuted in 2003. There was like me and Kenneth Williams and Robbie Hazley and Alexander Dargatz and Denise Nicole. We were like the 5. Like that was it. And we represented, by the way, those people I just mentioned. You might be able to tell from their names. Alexander Dargatz was from Germany. Robbie Hazley from the UK. Kenneth and I were in the US, and Denise as well. I mean, there were 5 of us spread around the globe back when MySpace was your only social network out there. And so yeah, it was different. It was different when I would talk about my diet or lifestyle backstage with people who would eat 6 chicken breasts a day, whey protein drinks all day long, animal foods of all types, every day, all day. So it was, people were, intrigued by it, maybe confused by it. And I'll have to tell you, another thing that's really fulfilling these days, it's just kind of fun. Again, it's just kind of fun for me, is that when I was a 21-year-old bodybuilder, a vegan bodybuilder, I had an apartment in Phoenix, Arizona. And like a lot of 21-year-old guys, probably just plastered with posters on the wall. And a lot of them were of bodybuilders that I looked up to. And these days, I go to the largest fitness expos in the country, the Arnold Classic, the Olympia, and I literally sign books for these people that I had idolized on my wall who are now interested in a plant-based diet. They're now in their 50s. They're retired from competitive bodybuilding. I just turned 40 a few months ago. And so they're a good 15, 20 years older than me, many of them that I looked up to. And now I'm signing books for them. And some of them are the greatest bodybuilders who have ever lived, like Chris Cormier. And but they tell me, because they're trainers now, they still have their reputation. They're hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. They were a famous bodybuilder on magazine covers and flown around the world back during the bodybuilding heyday. And now, they're personal trainers using their name to attract clients, including some big name clients. And they say, yeah, they come up to my booth, with Vegan Strong at these events, and they say, hey, a lot of my guys are interested in this plant-based thing. So now I get to sign books for people that I saw as heroes and role models. So it's just another fun thing that's come full circle, where it wasn't embraced in the early days, and now it is actually becoming relatively common in the bodybuilding world for people to know, understand, and be aware of a plant-based diet in bodybuilding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to talk about you and your posse invading shows like the Arnold and your Vegan Strong tent, and you're all vegan bodybuilders, and you all look like bodybuilders. Amazing, just shredded up. When you first started that venture, let's go back to the first Arnold you went to, and you set up your tent, and you're probably not the popular kid on the block at that time. Now there's some curiosity building, and you probably have more comfortable conversations, let's say, than you used to. What was a couple of the first things that some of them said to you that showed their disbelief, really, that this was even possible, and that no, you're obviously on drugs? Because I see that all over social media. The vegan bodybuilders now, or just the vegan fitness experts. It's like, they're all shredded, and that's all people say. Oh, you're on drugs.
And I'm, you've met me a bunch of times. I'm not even all that big. I'm 212 pounds. I can flex. I don't know if it shows up there on the screen.
You're a lot bigger than me. So yeah, I think you are.
But a lot of bodybuilding is understanding how to pose and get good lighting and good tan and that kind of stuff. And so, I can appear. I mean, I just had that yesterday. I posted one of those funny things that people are doing now on social media, how it started and how it's going. Yeah. So I posted a photo when I first became vegan 25 years ago, barely 100 pounds, and how it's going, a photo 215 pounds, from a few weeks ago. And and the very first comment was, steroid syringes and all that. And I've been drug free my entire life. Nothing, no smoking, drinking, no beer, wine, alcohol, just drug free my entire life. And so I used to get offended when people would accuse me.
Well, is that what would happen? What would happen at these shows when you first set up the tent, the very first Arnold? Like, what were they saying? What were the questions? Was it that?
Well,
was it accusing you of drugs?
Well, it's mostly in photos. In person, it's more curiosity, to be honest.
Good.
And I actually started doing these years ago, but under the umbrella of Vega and bodybuilding.com. So I was doing a bunch of these events like 10 years ago, before I had my own with Vegan Bodybuilding or with Vegan Strong, which I've been doing the last 3 years. So 10 years ago, I was still there doing my thing with my vegan setup with Vega and everything at these fitness expos. And it was more curiosity. Mm. And in fact, some people who were famous bodybuilders back then, I'm thinking of a couple people in mind right now, who were not at all on the plant-based path, at all. And they were using, drugs and that kind of thing. Now I see them on social media and they are plant-based. And even the most popular fitness model of that entire era, of an entire decade or longer, reached out to me a while ago, maybe a year or two ago, about some sort of plant-based product. And I thought it was so funny. I used to wait in line literally for 2 hours just to get a photo with her. And now she's come around to, embracing the plant-based lifestyle. And so that's kind of how it was. It was a lot of, there was some finger pointing and that kind of thing, and confusion, but I think most of it was curiosity more than anything. And now it's gone from curiosity to feeling a little bit embraced. When I see Jay Cutler, arguably the first, second, third best bodybuilder in the history of the world. I've known him for 20 years. I just saw him months ago in January before this whole thing with the virus kicked in at a big expo. And he's like, man, you were doing this vegan thing way before it was cool. He's like, you were ahead of everybody, because now it's like everybody's doing it. Obviously the Game Changers had a lot to do with that. Many other things had a lot to do with it. Just people's understanding of nutrition has improved from Neanderthal days. We're getting smarter. Stores it doesn't matter anywhere America. It could be at a Kroger store. It doesn't have to be a Whole Foods. You see plant-based products everywhere, just booming, and it's just the awareness is higher. So now it feels like, now we're being embraced by the community, including professional athletes, including famous athletes, where before it was like, does this guy belong here? And I'm confused by this.
Mm-hmm. Those athletes whom you revered, who are now coming to you asking about plant-based diets, who are in their 50s after decades of eating really high protein diets, how's their health? Is that why they're coming to you? Have you noticed a difference between the plant-based athletes and the meat-based athletes?
I can tell you exactly why they're coming to me. You want to know why? Because a lot of their friends and colleagues aren't around anymore. I have albums full of photos with bodybuilders I looked up to who passed away late 30s, early 40s. Organ failure, heart attacks, all kinds of things related to a combination, it has to be very clear, a combination of a very high animal protein diet with anabolic drug use. It's not just the steroids. It's unequivocally not just the steroids. We're talking about full-blown heart attacks and organ failure where kidneys and liver can no longer take if you're ready for this, the upwards of 600 grams of protein per day. Now I eat about 100 grams per day. And even Jay Cutler, who's twice my size, big, massive, 260-pound bodybuilder, said he only ate about 275 grams per day, and he's still around. A lot of these athletes, and some of my favorites, even one of them is even in my vegan bodybuilding book. We have a photo together because he was known as like the red meat guy. The late Mike Matarazzo. He was known as, writing articles making fun of vegetarians. So it was kind of fun for me to get a photo with him, do my smiling thumbs up, because they just the antithesis, the arch rival or the juxtaposition of it all. Yeah. And he unfortunately passed away in his early 40s. And, so did Nasser El-Sambadi and Art Atwood and Greg Kovacs. And the list goes on and on and on. And they're all people I met, and they just didn't make it. Their bodies could not handle that amount of damage. And we know it just from, I'm sure you've had many guests on your show who explain that from a scientific perspective, that if you have plaque buildup in arteries and damage artery walls, and they start to close up and blood can no longer flow throughout your body, which it has to do like every second of the day, you are susceptible to having a cardiac issue and basically imminent death. And that happens to many, many people who've gone on this bodybuilding path. And so that's why a lot of them are coming to people like me now, because they know the damage they've done. They know the damage they've done. They know what their arteries must look like. They probably get some checkups and hear from doctors that they're in some significant trouble. Some of them have had amputated limbs. Many have passed away. Others are dealing with post-competition obesity and other things where I'm sure this is common with athletes who competed their whole lives, and now especially bodybuilders or powerlifters, they're still eating that way, but they're not burning those calories, and they're just ballooning up into excess weight, which then is also not health promoting, which exacerbates those issues, those underlying conditions they already have.
But wait, I
now
have a
at
question.
Age 55, they're coming to us.
Are they unhealthy because of a preoccupation with protein or with animal protein specifically? Because it sounds like you have a different philosophy in terms of protein. Is that the difference, that you're eating
absolutely.
less protein?
And I've interviewed all kinds of experts, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, Dr. Joel Kahn, Dr. Michael Greger, so many others, for either my books or other things that I've done. And it's not just protein. It's not just amino acids. It's not just protein itself that's the problem. It's protein coming from animal tissue. That has been shown to be the problem. That's what the China study showed. That's what so many other studies and tests have shown. I just referenced about 15 or 20 scientific studies in my latest book, The Plant-Based Athlete. They compare the effects of plant-based protein versus animal-based protein. They often use something like whey protein versus pea protein, which is, why would you do that? Well, those are the most common plant-based supplement forms in the world. Aside from just eating meat and drinking milk, it's whey protein that's consumed in supplemental form through protein drinks, protein shakes. That's what bodybuilders, athletes of all types are consuming. And so they'll test that against pea protein, which is not that vegans are going around eating peas all the time, but it's that, that's what many of the protein drinks are based on. And so since athletes of all types typically find themselves using these types of supplements, they compare these studies and they show that the plant-based protein does not have that damaging effect. It doesn't have the damaging effect on kidneys or liver or other organs, and it's the animal protein that does. And they do all types of different tests. And Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn and others could talk more eloquently from a medical perspective of how they do those tests, how they actually perform them. The blood tourniquet test, the other tests, how they measure endothelial cell function after consumption of animal foods. There's all types of different things. Brachial artery tourniquet test. There's all these names that that are common for them as doctors and physicians that they could tell you more about. But at the end of the day, what we've been able to determine at this point, 2020, what we know right now is that it's something specific to animal protein that causes the problem. And I mean, I consumed 300 grams of plant protein a day before I got off supplements 8 years ago. I was doing that for a decade, and many of my colleagues, including other guests you've had on the show, plant-based athletes, have eat all kinds of plant-based protein. And that's not necessarily the issue. But I do think, and I just talked to with Rich Roll 2 days ago, with Rich Roll and Dr. Clapper for a webinar we just did 2 days ago, and we talked about our obsession with protein in general is problematic. Whether it's plant-based or animal-based, it's still problematic. Animal-based is 100 times worse, but still, from a nutritional standpoint, when our emphasis is on protein, we forfeit the opportunity to eat more nutrient-dense, complex carbohydrates filled with more vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, fiber, water that we would get from whole, complex carbohydrate-rich foods, fruits, vegetables, legumes, grains. When we focus on protein, especially isolated protein, shakes, powders, bars, tofus, whatever, we're missing out on so much more that would come from the whole food sources of complex carbohydrate-rich foods.
So speaking about macronutrients, micronutrients, and that devil there, protein, our awesome board engineer here at our studio lifts a lot of weights and struggles to put on muscle. So can you pitch him on how he's going to put on muscle on a plant-based diet?
Yeah, the solution is so easy. I wrote about it in great detail and Shred It. Here's what you have to do and what most people don't understand, or they understand it on a fundamental level, but not on a practical level. You have to be in a calorie surplus in order to add mass. And if you combine that with resistance weight training, that mass is more likely to be muscle than fat. So what do I mean by that? Let's go back to when I had the epic failure. When I tried to gain muscle for a whole year, didn't gain any. What happened? What happened on a scientific level? What was happening was that I was expending more calories than I was consuming. Okay, I was burning more than I was consuming throughout the day. So if anything, I was going to lose weight. It depended on how close that separation was. I might maintain weight if it's just off by 100 calories. But if it's hundreds of calories per day, I'm going to lose weight. So in order to gain mass, in order to build muscle, first, you have to deploy the most important word in the world, besides love, I guess, which is consistency. You have to be consistent. You can't just say, I work out a couple times a week. How come I'm not getting bigger or stronger? Or, hey, I ate pretty healthy today. Or today I remembered to have my post-workout meal. How come I don't have big biceps? Well, how come my jeans aren't super tight now from the squats I've done for 2 days? You have to be consistent over time. and you need to be in a calorie surplus over time in order to add mass to your frame. So what does that look like? Well, for me, what it looks like is this. I know from using the Harris-Benedict equation, the Harris-Benedict calculator, which factors your gender, age, height, weight, and activity level, that as a 6 foot, 210 pound, 40-year-old male who works out 4 days a week, I need about 3,000 calories per day to maintain weight, because that's what I'm burning through metabolism, through my basal metabolic rate, and through my activity based on my size and gender and age, that I'm burning 3,000 calories a day just throughout my daily life, exercising, like I said, 4 days a week plus dog walks every day. So what does that mean? So if I want to stay the same 212 pounds, I need to eat 3,000 calories every day. If I want to build muscle and add some mass and get up to 220 pounds perhaps, or 215 or 218, I need to increase my calorie intake beyond my exertion by a few hundred calories per day, so that it adds up to an excess of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 per week, and tens of thousands perhaps per month or over a period of months. And that's how I add mass over time. That's how anyone adds mass over time. That's how obesity happens. That's how being overweight happens. We consume more calories than we expend. How do we lose weight? The same thing. If my same scenario, I need 3,000 calories to stay the same weight, but if I want to get back to being a runner again and weigh 150 or 160 pounds, I need to simply reduce my calorie intake to 2,500 or 2,400, or increase my exercise expenditure so that I'm burning more. I'm burning 3,500 calories a day and still eating 3,000. So then I'm in a deficit by hundreds of calories day after day after day, which is thousands per week and tens of thousands potentially per month or per year. And then all of a sudden I lose weight. And that's how it works. So anyone struggling to build muscle, you've got to audit yourself, take some sort of accountability test, and document what you're consuming for an entire week or so. And Dots, I'm not big on recording stuff, and I haven't recorded my calorie intake for years. But when I have done it, I've done it for weeks at a time, and I've learned a lot about myself. What I eat, what I don't eat, how much I consume as far as liquids or liquids that have added sugars, and all these other factors. And that is how we understand what we need to do to then put ourselves in a position to achieve that goal.
Let's go deep like Dotsy likes to go. I want to ask you, has bodybuilding affected your relationship with food and your body at all?
Absolutely. It has for a long time. In fact, as social media started to explode over the years, Facebook, Instagram, those kind of things, YouTube, which coincided with my retirement from bodybuilding, even at a young age, when I was in the best shape of my life, I really struggled. Because I was no longer the person I identified with, or at least I no longer looked the part, to the point that I would go on tour. I've been on a speaking tour for 15 years now. I've been so fortunate. It's taken me around the world, from Australia to China to Europe and all over the place. I would be on tour and people would tell me, you don't look like you used to, or what happened to you, or you don't look the same as you do in photos, or even the last time you came to Australia a year ago, you look different now. What happened? What are you doing differently? And what I was doing differently was being very stressed out and trying to handle no longer being the person I thought I was. And I used a lot of things to compensate for that. I wrote articles for magazines and was on covers of magazines and used old photos, and I would write books. And even to this day, yesterday, I was posting, flashback photos. It wasn't even Throwback Thursday, but I was posting some photos of when I was leg pressing over 1,000 pounds and using 120-pound dumbbells in each hand for chest press, because I remember those as being good times. I was the most capable I'd ever been. I was so strong. And it's tough to not always feel that way. And bodybuilding leaves you in a position where your standard is set by the best you've ever achieved. Much like Dotsie, I'm sure it's for you, it's the time you achieved, maybe the fastest time trial or whatever. And that's the standard you set yourself to. But for us, and I'm not saying it's dramatically different, but for us, it's our physical body. It's how people look at us and identify with us or relate to us. And there have been many times where I don't feel like a bodybuilder at all. I turn down every podcast opportunity. If you notice, I haven't been on YouTube in 10 years. There's a reason for that. I wanted to always put my best foot forward. And for me, my best foot has been my hand with writing. I figured that's the thing that I'm best at right now. Or maybe bodybuilding I was best at for a time. And sure, I showed that off. But now my writing is my best. At times it was my public speaking. That was my strongest. And so I have struggled, and I know others have too, with self-identity and self-worth. And I don't say these in some sort of like, feel bad for me kind of thing. I'm just expressing what it's like to feel like you have achieved your personal best and then to go backward from that ever since. And I never like to make excuses. I've talked to Dotsie about this a number of times. I've had a number of lower back injuries that have prevented me from, for the most part, achieving certain potential, because I hurt my back significantly when I was 16. So my entire bodybuilding career was plagued by this thing that would leave me temporarily paralyzed, where I couldn't use my limbs very well, couldn't get dressed very well. I couldn't walk for periods of time. I had nerve damage, herniated discs. And I mean, these are real. Like, I was actually just stuck in parking lots and couldn't move. I couldn't, even if a car was running towards me, I could not get out of the way. It wasn't possible. I couldn't pick up my 10-pound dog. So I've, I still train these days, but it's for fun and I'm careful. I trained this morning. I trained last night, but it's mostly for the joy of exercise. But I will tell you one last thing, and I don't talk about it a whole lot, but there was a time when I was one of the only vegan bodybuilders in the world, and I felt so much pressure and expectation on my shoulders around 2005, 2006, that I actually used expressions like, I hated bodybuilding. I resented it so much, because if I wasn't my best, I was letting the whole industry down. And it's another topic, but I also, the way that women are often treated in the sport of bodybuilding and put on display in the smallest outfits you can imagine, and to go pass out whey protein drinks on a tray at these events, and the things that they're expected to do to advance in the sport of bodybuilding. I've walked out of the Super Bowl of bodybuilding multiple times because of how women were treated in the sport, and So it's a complex relationship that I have with the sport, who gave me whatever relevance I have in the society or in the world. It all stemmed from the sport that I'm still not totally okay with. People that were my favorite bodybuilders in the world passed away because of the sport, because the way they were told they had to eat and live to be the best in the sport. They had to eat animals like crazy. They had to take drugs like crazy. They're no longer here, and how it's made me feel. So it's a long and storied relationship that I have with the sport that put me here talking to you today.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit about the book coming out, because given that you're really you're one of the very first to bring vegan athletics and athleticism to life, right? You're one of the first to even give that conversation oxygen, and you've put this book together about vegan athletes. What is your hope for the world? What is your hope that the world hears and then potentially acts on from putting this book out?
Yeah, thanks, Dotsie. And the book is The Plant-Based Athlete. It's due out in May of 2021 with the world's second largest publisher, HarperCollins, and it's going to be a hardcover copy, and it's just going to be such a different experience. I've self-published books my whole life. I used to sleep in my car in cities all across America, just trying to make it, selling books literally out of my trunk, just trying to make it to the next town to give a talk, and hopefully people will show up. And this is just a whole different ball game now. And this book, The Plant-Based Athlete, I actually wrote a proposal for in 2013. Maybe it was a little ahead of its time. Publishers were interested, but I just wasn't able to afford to do it with all the ins and outs that a lot of people don't know of what it means to be an author on a large scale, and the people you have to hire to help you with writing the proposal, which, by the way, for those who don't know, could cost $10,000 or $15,000 just to write a proposal, and then to hire a writer may cost over $50,000. The going rate is over $50,000. A side note: I wrote the book Shred It as a fundraiser way back then. It was supposed to be a 60-page ebook. I was trying to raise money to hire a writer because that's what the agent said. They said I wasn't good enough. Robert, you're not good enough to write this book. You need to pay $60,000 for a writer. And my 60-page ebook turned out to be a 400-page, Shred It, which then went on to be a self-published bestseller and brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue and inspired thousands of people. And it was just a self-published thing that Dr. Campbell and Esselstyn and people, Emily Deschanel and Def Leppard and all these people endorsed, and it was just a self-published thing.
Aren't you one of the most successful self-publishing authors?
Yeah, that's what I've been told. The volume that I've moved, well over $1 million in book sales and 60,000 copies. For perspective, even some celebrity authors only sell 5,000 copies or 10,000. Selling books is so much harder than people could ever imagine. It's kind of like maybe selling albums when you're a mid-level band or whatever. You don't sell as many as people think you do. And even if you have a large following of hundreds of thousands, it doesn't work that way. And so, yeah, I've been told by multiple publishers that I'm one of the most successful self-published authors in America, because most don't get to that point. And so that's what helped me land this big book deal. And so with this book, The Plant-Based Athlete, now obviously on the heels of the Game Changers and on the heels of Nimai Delgado and Tori Washington and all these more well-known vegan bodybuilders and plant-based athletes, Cam Newton and Chris Paul and all these people, Dotsie Bausch and all these people around the world who've been fantastic. What I've done, Dotsie, to answer your question, is I've interviewed close to 100 plant-based athletes, including about 40 that are really well known, like Megan Duhamel, and you put me in touch with her, and Rich Roll and Scott Jurek and Brendan Brazier and Rip Esselstyn and you and tons of world champions, Laura Klein and Mary Schneeder and Jahina Malik and James Wilkes and all these great athletes. And what I've always wanted to do, my little tagline about the book, just to promote it, is I've wanted to tell the compelling stories of the world's greatest plant-based athletes. And what I've done is captured stories of people who have been vegan since birth, which can help knock that protein myth completely out of the water. And then people who have been plant-based for decades, as well as people who are newer to it, like Chris Paul in the NBA. We're hoping to reach an audience, a wide and diverse audience that feels empowered to embrace all of their health and fitness goals with the power of plants. Josh Lajani, and one of his stories is one of my favorites in the whole book. Can you imagine a guy who was over 400 pounds and now not only runs ultra marathons, but he's actually even won one, and he's been second place a bunch of times. He's been an ultra marathon champion at a body weight of 180 pounds, 185 when he was 420. And telling his story.
It's like the opposite of you. You went skinny to big and he did the other way.
Yeah. But it's just some of the stories in here are they're just so fun. And then of course we have all the nutritional science, and we've got Dr. Greger's input and all the meal plans and recipes, and so it's a complete big book, 300 to 400 pages. That is actually mostly about plant-based sports nutrition. The stories are sprinkled in there to give you that relatability and inspiration and motivation and the accessibility that there's people at the top of their game, Cam Newton in the NFL, et cetera, who are doing this.
I want to touch on one. You're a writer, and you've influenced so many people through your writing. And one of the arguments for not eating a plant-based diet is that it's too expensive. And you wrote a 35-page treatise it's called Save Money, Eat Plants. Can you give us a real couple nuggets to explain to people why it's cheaper actually to eat a whole food plant-based diet?
It's a lot of the things that you would suspect. lentils, beans, oats, rice, foods that are available in populations around the world, including populations that don't have a lot of the health problems that the Western world has, including obesity, where 72% of Americans are overweight or obese right now, which is, it's a staggering statistic, but it also it suggests a lot of underlying health conditions and problems too. So it's worth pointing out that it's actually important. It's nothing to do with fat shaming or acknowledging that there's a new normal as far as body weight in America. It's that the new normal is having healthcare costs that are through the roof, and we're all losing loved ones, myself included, before their time, because of these health issues. So what we did was we looked at the real cost of food, of what it costs to grow and harvest and prepare these foods. And as you would suspect, animal foods are incredibly labor intensive and resource intensive. The amount of land and water and machinery and staff and labor and hours and time, the length to even grow an animal, to then slaughter and harvest and transport, refrigerate and freeze and plastic wrap and all this, is incredibly expensive. But why is it so cheap? Because of the long-standing government subsidies that have been there, where farmers across America are given significant government subsidies to continue to make animal agriculture not only the norm, but the propeller that propels America forward. The bottom line is there's incredible incentives for them to grow animal foods. And so what we have to do is raise awareness of why we should grow plants instead. And the true cost is so much more effective for consumers. But there's still ways that those farmers can be profitable as well, even if the crops don't sell for as much. They can do so much more volume because that's what everyone is eating. Everyone's eating those grains and legumes and such. And so I think we have to make the argument the three of us would love to make is the animal cruelty argument, the animal rights argument, the moral compass, an ethical standpoint argument, but that's not what people want to hear, especially in farming of animals. They want to hear a dollars and cents argument. As someone who grew up on a farm and grew up next to a dairy, right next to a dairy, right next to a bordering property, and another dairy another mile and a half down the road, and who has a brother who's a farmer right now, I can tell you farmers don't love killing animals. They don't. They do it because that's what they know as far as making money and providing for their families. But they don't love doing it. And so I think if we can find a more compassionate way, they would do it if they can still make ends meet.
Take care of the family.
I just wanted to mention that out, because we do, for very good reason. We have a lot of problems with farms, but for the most part, it's something that's been passed down and passed down and passed down, mm-hmm. and they just don't know any better. And so that's where I think we come in and we say, look, there is something better. There is an alternative. And here's how we can do this together. And I think that's the conversation that needs to take place. And that's going to be the most effective way as well.
Yeah. Thank you for your depth of character and your love and your light and your trailblazing efforts. And we're just so much better with you on this planet.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, for being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
So everybody you can read Save Money, Eat Plants and learn more about what Robert was just talking about, or look for his book, Plant-Based Athletes, coming out in 2021.
Yeah. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity today.
For tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.